Elijah lived in a house at the edge of nowhere. It was the kind of place people stopped noticing years ago, weather-beaten structure hidden behind gnarled trees, surrounded by brittle grass and rusting fences. Time had passed over it like a slow-moving storm, stripping away life one layer at a time. The mailbox was crooked, the windows permanently smudged with dust, and the front porch groaned under the weight of memories too heavy to bear. But inside the house, the silence was worse. There were no photos on the walls, no clocks ticking, no signs of anyone else having been there in years. Elijah had not spoken to another human being in over 6 months. He was not old, but he carried himself like someone who had lived too long. His shoulders slouched under invisible burdens, and his hands were worn not from work, but from clenching pain for too many years. Once, long ago, he had been a husband, a father, a man of faith and warmth. But those people were buried now, some in graves, some in his memory, and some simply gone without explanation. Life had taken everything from him, one piece at a time. First, his wife, after a long illness, then his only son, swallowed by war, then the will to keep pretending. For a long time, Elijah had existed in limbo, waking up because his body still could, feeding himself because he hadn't yet forgotten how, and sleeping because there was nothing else to do. He moved through his days like a ghost haunting his own skin. He didn't bother with calendars or seasons. Days bled into each other. The world went on without him. And finally, one quiet morning, Elijah made a decision not out of emotion, but out of stillness. He was going to end it. Not violently, not dramatically, just quietly, peacefully, alone. The way he had lived for so long, he had thought it through. Over weeks, maybe months, he wasn't sure anymore. He wasn't depressed, he told himself. Just done, tired, ready to stop pretending that anything was going to change. There was no one to miss him, no one who would come knocking. The world didn't even remember where he lived. That morning, he rose with unusual clarity. The sky was pale, and the air was dry. He walked into the shed and retrieved an old, splintered shovel, its wooden handle smooth from years of disuse. Then he made his way to the backyard, the same ground where his son had once chased butterflies and where his wife had planted lavender. He didn't cry. He didn't hesitate. He simply began to dig. The earth was stubborn, hard, sun-baked, and resistant. But Elijah dug anyway, his muscles aching, his back stiff, sweat trickling down his temples. Each scoop of dirt was like a strange kind of prayer, unspoken but understood by the universe. He wasn't doing this out of anger, just inevitability. Like a man finally packing his things after waiting too long at a station where the train would never come. The hole grew slowly, unevenly, more symbolic than precise. He didn't measure or plan. It wasn't about the depth, it was about the finality, and as he paused to wipe his brow with the edge of his sleeve, he looked around at the land that had once been filled with life, laughter echoing through the yard, warm dinners on the porch, music drifting through open windows. All of it now, reduced to silence and soil. The sun rose higher, baking the dry fields in gold. Birds sang somewhere far off, but Elijah didn't hear them. He was too far inside himself, too focused on completing the last thing he would ever do. And just when he was about to kneel down to rest, a sound broke through his trance. A strange, desperate noise, part whimper, part gasp. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't the creak of the fence or the rustle of a squirrel. It was human, weak, urgent. Elijah froze. He turned toward the driveway, and what he saw would change everything. But that moment hadn't come yet. For now, Elijah was still, a man alone, digging his own grave, believing that life had nothing more to give him. He was wrong. Just as Elijah paused to lean on the shovel, his chest heaving from exhaustion and the weight of silent grief, a strange sound cut through the heavy afternoon air. It was faint at first, barely more than a whisper against the rustle of dry grass and the distant creak of the barn roof, but then it came again, clearer this time. A sharp cry, hoarse and trembling, the kind of sound that didn't come from animals or wind or memory. Elijah's head snapped toward the direction of the noise. For a moment, he thought he had imagined it. His mind, long buried in isolation, had played tricks before. Ghosts of his son's laughter, the scent of his wife's perfume, shadows where no one stood. But this was different. This was real. Instinctively, he gripped the handle of the shovel tighter, a chill crawling up his spine despite the sweltering sun. Then he saw her. At the far end of the dusty driveway, where the gravel met the cracked edge of the old county road, a figure was stumbling toward his gate. She was barely more than a silhouette at first, bent forward, legs trembling beneath her. Dust clung to her skin and clothes like ash. Her long dark hair was matted, her face smeared with sweat and dirt. Each step looked like it took everything she had left. Elijah dropped the shovel. She was young, not more than 20, maybe less, and very pregnant. Her hands clutched her round belly, her breathing ragged, eyes half closed, as though the sunlight itself was too much to bear. He took a few steps forward, unsure if he was witnessing reality or some strange hallucination conjured by his exhausted, grief-hardened mind. But she kept coming, each footstep slower than the last. Her knees buckled once, Then again, she made it just past the old wooden gate, barely a few feet onto his land, before she collapsed with a thud that seemed to shake. The dry earth, a puff of dust rose around her. She landed on her side, one arm flung forward as if still reaching for help. Then silence. Elijah stood frozen. The sound of the world seemed to dim, as if even the birds were holding their breath. For what felt like an eternity, he didn't move. He stared at the girl lying at his gate, the one no one had walked through in years. Her presence shattered every wall he had carefully built around his solitude. It wasn't just unexpected, it was unthinkable. His first instinct was caution. Who was she? Why was she here? Was this some setup, some trick or trap? But then he saw her belly rise and fall, shallow and fast. He noticed the raw scrapes on her bare feet, the tear in her dress, the dark circle of dried blood staining the fabric near her hip. She wasn't a threat. She was in danger, and she needed help. Something. Inside, Elijah stirred something so long buried, he didn't recognize it at first. The part of him that used to jump up when his son scraped a knee. The part that had once stayed up all night, holding his wife's hand through fevers and chemo. The part that had been silent for years, now pulsed to life again with sudden urgency. He rushed forward. The dry gravel crunched beneath his boots as he reached her. Her skin was hot, feverish. Her lips were cracked. Her eyes fluttered open for a second, barely focusing on him. Help, she whispered, so quietly he almost missed it. I've got you, Elijah said, his voice rasping from disuse, the words unfamiliar on his tongue. You're safe now. He bent down and, with surprising strength, lifted her into his arms. She was light, far too light. Her head rested against his shoulder, her breathing shallow and uneven. He carried her toward the house, the very house that just hours before had been a place of endings. Now, suddenly, it was a place of emergency, of survival, of life. Inside, the air was cooler. He laid her gently on the couch, grabbed a damp cloth, and placed it on her forehead. She didn't stir, not yet. He fetched water, covered her with a blanket, and sat beside her, unsure of what to do next, but knowing one thing with total certainty. He wasn't alone anymore, and whatever story this girl brought with her, it had already rewritten the ending he thought he'd planned. Elijah sat stiffly in the wooden chair across from the couch, hands clasped tightly between his knees, watching the girl sleep. A strange stillness had settled over the room, but it wasn't like before. The usual silence that lived in Elijah's home was heavy and hopeless. This one was uncertain, fragile, as though even the walls were holding their breath. The girl's chest rose and fell in uneven rhythm, her face flushed, lips dry and parted. She murmured something in her sleep, barely a whisper, but he couldn't make out the words. He rubbed his chin, the stubble coarse beneath his fingers. What was he supposed to do now? This wasn't part of the plan. Just hours ago, he had stood in his backyard digging his own grave, utterly convinced that his life story was finished. There were no chapters left to write, no unexpected visitors to arrive at the final page. And yet, here she was, young, fragile, pregnant, and unconscious on his couch. Like a storm had blown her in from the edge of the world and left her at his doorstep. He thought about calling someone. The police, a hospital, anyone. But the old landline in the kitchen had been dead for months, and his cell phone, if he could even find it, was likely buried under a pile of unopened mail. He didn't trust people, not anymore. He didn't want questions, or visitors, or complications. For years, he had made it his mission to disappear, to fade out of view. And now, in a twist of fate, life had walked right back in through the front gate and collapsed on his property. Uninvited, vulnerable, human. Stood up and moved toward the girl again, kneeling down beside the couch. Her name. He didn't know her name. He hadn't even checked for ID. So focused he had been on her breathing, on whether she would wake at all. Elijah, he said quietly, testing his own voice. My name's Elijah. The girl didn't respond. Belly shifted slightly under the blanket he'd draped over her. He couldn't tell how far along she was, but far enough that the baby could come at any moment. What if she was in labor already? What if something was wrong? He didn't know the first thing about delivering babies. He'd never even been in the room when his own son was born. His wife had gone through it alone, while he was stranded during a snowstorm, pacing the hallways of a distant hospital. He shook the memory away. This wasn't the time to revisit his failures. Elijah moved to the kitchen and grabbed a clean towel and a bowl of lukewarm water. He returned to the girl's side, gently dabbing her forehead. Her skin was hot and clammy, but her breathing had steadied. As he wiped her hands and face, he noticed bruises on her wrists. Old ones, fading, but visible, finger-shaped. His chest tightened. Who had done this to her? And what was she running from? There were no answers, only speculation. But the questions themselves were enough to stir something long dormant in him. Anger, protection, a sense of duty he had thought buried with the rest of his past. He didn't know this girl, know where she came from, what choices she had made, or how she ended up here. But she had fallen at his gate, literally. And that meant something, didn't it? For hours, Elijah kept watch. He didn't eat, he barely drank. He just sat there, one hand resting gently on the edge of the couch as if to remind himself she was still real. Every so often, she'd shift or murmur, and he'd lean forward, ready to help. Unsure how. By nightfall, the girl opened her eyes. That happened slowly, a flicker of lashes, a twitch of fingers, and then her gaze locked onto his confused, wary. Afraid, you're safe, he said softly. You collapsed at my gate. I brought you inside. She didn't respond, but her body seemed to relax by a fraction. I don't know who you are, Elijah continued, voice trembling, but you can stay until you're better. Her lips moved, a hoarse whisper. Thank you. That was all, but for Elijah, who had spoken to no one in months, who had intended to bury himself and silence it, was enough. And though he couldn't explain it, deep down, he understood one thing. The grave he had dug that morning was no longer meant for him. It was meant to be filled with the life he hadn't expected to save. A name and a past. Morning light crept through the tattered curtains as Elijah sat beside the sleeping girl, his coffee untouched on the table. The house felt different, not lighter, exactly, but no longer hollow. It was as though a spark had returned, faint but persistent, warming the cold spaces he'd once accepted as permanent. He hadn't spoken so many words out loud in months, maybe years, yet now he found himself rehearsing questions in his mind. Not just who are you, but are you safe now, and can I help you stay that way? When the girl finally stirred again, blinking against the sunlight, her movements were slow and uncertain. Elijah leaned forward cautiously. Hey, he said gently, his voice softer than the groan of the old floorboards beneath his feet. You're okay. You're safe here. She turned her head, squinting at him through sleep-heavy eyes. There was fear there, deeply embedded, but also something else. Exhaustion, gratitude, wariness wrapped in vulnerability. After a long pause, she spoke. My name is Myra. It was barely audible, as though saying her own name felt like giving something away she wasn't sure she could spare, but Elijah nodded, repeating it softly under his breath. Myra, a simple name, but now charged with meaning. A thread between strangers. He offered her a sip of water, and she accepted it with shaking hands. He wanted to ask more, so many questions, bursting at the seams, but something told him not to push. She looked like a wild animal caught between flight and collapse, unsure if this moment was kindness or another trap. Instead, he kept his voice steady, low, gentle. You don't have to talk about anything yet. Just rest. When you're ready. But Myra surprised him. I walked for 2 days. She whispered. Maybe more. I lost count. Elijah didn't interrupt. I had to leave. I couldn't stay. It wasn't safe anymore. She clutched her belly instinctively. The baby shifted under her hand, and Elijah's throat tightened. Was it the father? He asked. Before he could stop himself, Myra flinched, but then slowly nodded. He said he loved me, she murmured. At first, but when I told him about the baby, he changed. Started calling me things. Controlling everything. One night, he hit me so hard I couldn't stand up. I knew if I stayed, I'd lose the baby, or my life, maybe both. Elijah looked away, shame burning behind his eyes, not because of anything he had done, but because of everything he hadn't. How many women like her were out there? How many had cried for help while he was digging graves in his backyard, and convinced the world had nothing left worth holding on to? I'm sorry, he said simply. Myra didn't respond, but she didn't look away either. That, he took as a beginning. Over the next few hours, Elijah moved with quiet urgency. He cleaned the guest room for the first time in years, changed the bedding, aired out the windows. He made a simple broth and coaxed Myra into eating. She didn't say much, but she watched him with more trust now, like a stray animal slowly, realizing the hand reaching toward it won't strike. By sunset, the room looked almost warm. The lamp cast a soft glow over the worn wooden floor, and Elijah found himself sitting across from her again, a sense of strange calm settling over him. He wanted to tell her everything, that she had given him a reason to keep living, that her sudden appearance had flipped his world on its axis, but he didn't know how. So instead, he said what he could. You can stay here, he told her, as long as you need. She looked at him, then really looked. Her eyes were no longer wide with panic, but heavy with the weight of everything she'd carried. She nodded. Once, slowly. Thank you, she whispered again, and though the words were small, they cracked something open in Elijah's chest. Hope, perhaps, or maybe purpose. That night, as he lay awake in his bed for the first time in months, Elijah no longer thought about the grave in the yard. He thought about Myra, and the child she carried. And the possibility, however faint, that maybe life still had something left to give. Shadows from the road the next few days unfolded in a strange, quiet rhythm. Myra slept often, her body clearly worn thin from the journey and the stress that had haunted her like a shadow. Elijah kept his distance at first, not out of indifference, but out of respect. He could see she was still raw, her defenses only half lured, like an animal still unsure whether it had truly escaped the trap. But with each passing hour, she began to soften. Just a little, enough to accept warm meals, enough to let him sit with her in silence without tensing. Elijah found himself waking up earlier, moving with a sense of purpose that had eluded him for years. The house, once stale and cluttered with dust and ghosts, began to feel lived in again. He cleaned the porch, fixed the hinge on the screen door, and even repaired the small crib that had been stowed in the attic for decades. He hadn't known why he did it at first, just that the soft groan of wood under his hands felt right. One morning, Myra joined him outside. She stood on the porch, leaning on the rail, her hand resting gently on her belly. Her eyes scanned the horizon, the fields dry but golden in the sunlight. The quiet between them wasn't awkward, it was necessary, healing, and in that moment, Elijah felt something new take root in the silence between them. Trust. But trust is a fragile thing. It was on the fourth morning, just after sunrise, that Elijah spotted the car. It didn't belong. He knew every vehicle that rumbled down that old county road, delivery trucks, the sheriff's patrol, even the rusted old pickup. His nearest neighbor drove once a week into town, but this one was different. Sleek, dark, tinted windows. It moved slowly, too slowly, like it was watching rather than driving. Elijah narrowed his eyes and stepped off the porch. Myra was inside, finishing a small breakfast. He didn't want to alarm her, but every instinct screamed at him that this wasn't just some tourist taking the scenic route. The car passed the front of his property, slowed near the gate, then rolled on, but not without pause, not without intent. He waited until it disappeared over the hill before going back inside. Myra noticed his expression right away. She set down her mug. "What is it?" "Just a car," he said carefully. "Didn't recognize it." Her face went pale. Elijah didn't need her to say anything. The look in her eyes said it all. That car hadn't just unsettled him. It had triggered something deep in her. Something buried. Something dangerous. She wrapped her arms around herself and turned away. "Elijah," she said softly, "if they find me, they won't let me leave again. Not with the baby." He took a breath. The words came slower now, weighed down by consequence. "Do you think it was him?" Myra didn't answer, but the tears gathering in her eyes were confirmation enough. Elijah nodded once. He didn't ask why she hadn't gone to the police. He didn't lecture her or question her decisions. He knew that kind of fear, the kind that doesn't end when you run, it just changes shape. "Then they're not going to find you," he said firmly. "Not here." She looked at him, uncertain. "You don't have to do this for me. You didn't even know me a week ago." "That may be true," he replied, voice steady, "but you're here now, and I buried enough people already to know I'm not ready to lose another soul, especially one that's still got a chance." That night, Elijah checked all the locks on the doors. He pulled the blackout curtains across every window and moved an old hunting rifle from the attic down to the hallway closet, not out of fear, but readiness. For the first time in years, he felt something more powerful than grief. He felt protective. Myra wasn't just a stranger anymore. She was someone he had taken into his home, into his quiet life, and now, into his heart, and if someone was coming for her, they'd have to come through him first. The unseen battle, the days that followed, passed under a kind of watchful stillness, like the land itself had become aware of the looming presence circling the edges of their fragile peace. Myra tried to settle back into the rhythm they'd built. Morning conversations, warm soup in the evenings, the occasional flicker of a smile between them, but Elijah could sense the tension in her every movement. Her ears perked at every noise. Her eyes darted toward the windows too often. She was trying to act normal, trying to seem calm, but the fear hung around her like a thin veil. Elijah didn't press her. He simply watched, waited, and prepared. Every morning he walked the perimeter of the property, boots crunching over brittle grass. The fence was still intact, the gates locked, the trails behind the house untouched. But each time he completed the loop, he knew it meant less than it used to. Whoever was looking for Myra, if they were looking, wouldn't knock politely at the front gate. They'd come like wolves, quiet, sudden, and ruthless. Still, Elijah clung to the routine. It was all he could offer: protection through readiness, comfort through structure. He started leaving a lantern lit near the window at night, just in case she woke up disoriented. He left a loaded flashlight by her bedside. He even set up an old bell at the gate, strung with twine, so that it would jingle faintly if disturbed. It was a crude alarm system, but in this remote part of the county, even a few seconds of warning could make all the difference. Myra noticed. She never said anything directly, but one afternoon, as they shelled peas on the porch together, she reached out and gently squeezed his hand. "You don't have to do all this," she said softly, not meeting his eyes. "You've already done more than anyone else would have." Elijah didn't answer immediately. He looked at her hand in his so small, yet calloused from her time on the road, and then at her belly, which was now unmistakably round beneath her loose dress. "I know, I don't have to," he said finally, "but that's not why I'm doing it." She looked up then, her expression unreadable. "You're not a burden, Myra, and you didn't fall into my life by accident." A long silence followed. Then, almost in a whisper, she said, "You remind me of my father." Elijah blinked. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" Her laugh was faint, but real. "A good thing. He died when I was 13, but when he was alive, I always knew I was safe, even when the world was falling apart." Elijah looked away, fighting a lump in his throat. No one had said anything like that to him in a long time. As the sun dipped below the tree line and the porch grew dim, Myra turned serious again. "He'll come looking," she said. "Not because he cares, but because he thinks I belong to him. Because he can't stand to lose control." Elijah's jaw tightened. "Then we'll make sure he doesn't find you." That night, while Myra slept, Elijah stayed up. Not because he had to, but because something inside him had changed. He wasn't just keeping watch for danger. He was waging a silent battle against the darkness that had tried to take him not so long ago. The same darkness that whispered he was too old, too broken, too late to protect anyone again. Myra's arrival had ripped a hole in that lie, and now, as he stared out the window into the moonlit yard, he realized something he hadn't let himself believe before. He wanted to live, not just survive, not just exist, but live to see Myra safe, to see the baby born, to feel once again what it meant to be part of something that mattered. A car never came that night. The bell at the gate remained still. The shadows in the trees stayed shadows. But Elijah remained at his post long after midnight, one hand resting on the rifle beside him, and his heart beating with a new kind of fire. He wasn't just guarding a stranger anymore. He was guarding the future. The unseen battle of the days that followed passed under a kind of watchful stillness. Like the land itself had become aware of the looming presence circling the edges of their fragile peace. Myra tried to settle back into the rhythm they'd built. Morning conversations, warm soup in the evenings, the occasional flicker of a smile between them, but Elijah could sense the tension in her every movement. Her ears perked at every noise. Her eyes darted toward the windows too often. She was trying to act normal, trying to seem calm, but the fear hung around her like a thin veil. Elijah didn't press her. He simply watched, waited, and prepared. Every morning, he walked the perimeter of the property, boots crunching over brittle grass. The fence was still intact, the gates locked, the trails behind the house untouched. But each time he completed the loop, he knew it meant less than it used to. Whoever was looking for Myra, if they were looking, wouldn't knock politely at the front gate. They'd come like wolves, quiet, sudden, and ruthless. Still, Elijah clung to the routine. It was all he could offer: protection through readiness, comfort through structure. He started leaving a lantern lit near the window at night, just in case she woke up disoriented. He left a loaded flashlight by her bedside. He even set up an old bell at the gate, strung with twine, so that it would jingle faintly if disturbed. It was a crude alarm system, but in this remote part of the county, even a few seconds of warning could make all the difference. Myra noticed. She never said anything directly, but one afternoon, as they shelled peas on the porch together, she reached out and gently squeezed his hand. "You don't have to do all this," she said softly, not meeting his eyes. "You've already done more than anyone else would have." Elijah didn't answer immediately. He looked at her hand and is so small, yet calloused from her time on the road, and then at her belly, which was now unmistakably round beneath her loose dress. "I know, I don't have to," he said finally, "but that's not why I'm doing it." She looked up then, her expression unreadable. "You're not a burden, Myra, and you didn't fall into my life by accident." A long silence followed. Then, almost in a whisper, she said, "You remind me of my father." Elijah blinked. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" Her laugh was faint, but real. "A good thing. He died when I was 13. But, when he was alive, I always knew I was safe. Even when the world was falling apart." Elijah looked away, fighting a lump in his throat. No one had said anything like that to him in a long time. As the sun dipped below the tree line and the porch grew dim, Myra turned serious again. "He'll come looking," she said. "Not because he cares, but because he thinks I belong to him, because he can't stand to lose control." Elijah's jaw tightened. "Then we'll make sure he doesn't find you." That night, while Myra slept, Elijah stayed up. Not because he had to, but because something inside him had changed. He wasn't just keeping watch for danger. He was waging a silent battle against the darkness that had tried to take him not so long ago. The same darkness that whispered he was too old, too broken, too late to protect anyone again. Myra's arrival had ripped a hole in that lie. And now, as he stared out the window into the moonlit yard, he realized something he hadn't let himself believe before. He wanted to live, not just survive, not just exist, but live to see Myra safe, to see the baby born, to feel once again what it meant to be part of something that mattered. A car never came that night. The bell at the gate remained still. The shadows in the trees stayed shadows. But Elijah remained at his post long after midnight, one hand resting on the rifle beside him, and his heart beating with a new kind of fire. He wasn't just guarding a stranger anymore, he was guarding the future. It happened on a Thursday. The day had started like all the others. The sun rose in a blaze of copper light, casting long shadows across Elijah's land. Myra was feeling better that morning. She even insisted on helping him hang laundry despite his gentle protests. She had begun to laugh more easily, though always with a trace of something held back. As if joy were a luxury she wasn't sure she was allowed to claim. But the peace was fragile, and it shattered before noon. The sound came first, a deep, rumbling engine, louder than anything that had ever passed their quiet road. Elijah heard it before he saw it, and every muscle in his body went still. He stepped off the porch, heart thudding, and Myra appeared at the screen door behind him, sensing it too. The black SUV turned onto the dirt road leading to the house. The same one from before, sleek, dark, windows tinted like secrets. This time, it didn't pass, it stopped. Elijah's hands curled into fists. Myra's breath hitched. It's him. Everything after that happened in moments, but each moment burned like it lasted a lifetime. The SUV door opened, and a tall man stepped out. He was dressed in black polished boots, expensive jacket, sunglasses, even though the sky was overcast. He looked like someone used to being feared, used to getting what he wanted. "Myra," he called out, voice smooth as oil. "Come on now, you've made your point, time to come home." She didn't answer. She didn't move. Elijah stepped forward, putting himself between the man and the porch. "She's not going anywhere," he said. The man tilted his head, smiling like someone amused by a child with a stick. "Who are you supposed to be? The old farmer? Her rescuer?" he chuckled. "You think you can keep her here, in this shack? You don't know who I am, old man." Elijah's voice didn't waver. "Don't need to, I know what you are." The man's smile vanished. "You don't get to decide this. She belongs to me." That's when Myra spoke, her voice trembling but clear. "I don't belong to anyone." He turned toward her. "Myra, come here, right now, before I lose my patience." She didn't move, and that silence, her refusal, rang louder than any shout. Elijah raised the rifle slightly, not pointing it yet, but making it very visible. "You need to leave, now." The man's jaw clenched. His smile returned, but colder now. "You think this is over?" "No," Elijah said, "but it starts here." The SUV door opened again. A second man stepped out, heavier, dressed like security. He looked around, unimpressed by the aging farmer and the wooden house. But before he could take a step, the sound of sirens broke through the trees. Distant but approaching. Fast. The man froze. The driver of the SUV turned his head sharply. Then Myra spoke again, stronger this time. "I called them yesterday, gave them everything. Names, locations, photos. I'm not hiding anymore." The first man's expression twisted. For a second, he looked ready to charge the porch. But then he saw something in Elijah's eyes, something hard and unflinching, something that said, "I will not let you pass." And for the first time, he hesitated. The sirens grew louder. He cursed under his breath, then turned on his heel. "This isn't over," he snapped. Elijah didn't lower the rifle until the SUV spun its tires and disappeared down the road, a cloud of dust trailing behind it. Only then did Myra collapse onto the porch, shaking. He knelt beside her, one hand on her shoulder, steady and strong. "It's over," he said softly, but even as he said it, Elijah knew it wasn't that simple. Fear doesn't vanish just because the threat drives away. Trauma doesn't dissolve because the sun is still shining. But in that moment, they had faced the storm and the storm had backed down. And that meant something. That meant everything.